Hi, I'm Eric Manser. I do product marketing for a living, but my job is to tell Ziflow stories. In the window, right alongside me, let me introduce Charlotte Lammertink from Just Eat. Hi, Charlotte, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Eric.
It is truly, truly, truly my pleasure. Now, for those of you who don't know, Just Eat is one of the world's leading online food ordering and delivery platforms, and they connect customers with local restaurants to bring their favorite meals right to their doorstep. Whether you're craving pizza, sushi, curry, even fish and chips, Just Eat makes it fast, easy, and convenient to find and order exactly what you're looking for. But crucially, they also help restaurants reach a wider audience and increase sales. It's not just sort of a B2C connection. There is so many restaurants that utilize Just Eat's platform in order to get the word out about what it is that they do. They can also enhance the customer experience with reviews and ratings, special offers, and so much more. And of course, all of this does not happen without creative and creative operations specifically. Behind the scenes, there's a ton of work that makes all of this possible. And that is where Charlotte and her team come in. Charlotte, is that a pretty accurate assessment of what Just Eat is and what it is that you do there?
Yeah, I would say so. It's definitely uh, our objective is very clearly aligned, and yeah, we're a global brand, so we do all of this for multiple brands around the world that all fall under the Just Eat Takeaway umbrella.
Now, I have been fortunate to travel in Europe, and I've seen Just Eat outdoor advertising. Whether it be bus boards, billboards, even digital outside advertising. And I have to assume that that's just one of the many different types of creative contexts that your team works within in a given campaign. For your average campaign, let's call it a holiday campaign. How many different individual pieces of content are going through Ziflow and have to go through an approval process? I mean, everything from digital to outdoor to commercials, right? Like, how many individual things are your team reviewing and approving?
So we've onboarded Ziflow a little over a year ago, I want to say. And we've started because we do such a wide range of projects. We've started with the smaller projects, more of the BAU projects. It can be anything from from digital to print. We have a bunch of different channels that we use. So we have CRM, but we also have out of homes, and they can all go through Ziflow. In the first few months, we focused on the more localized assets. So the more like run-of-the-mill projects, but now we're moving more into larger projects that also maybe have ATL working with agencies as well. So agencies can upload into the system. So yeah, it's getting larger as we speak. But yeah, any channel that we create assets for can go through Ziflow.
So that's interesting. You mentioned agencies. So I think a lot of people who are watching the show, they may think to themselves, okay, well, I have an in-house creative team. I've got three or four, five designers, maybe video editors, website developers. They're all sort of contained in-house. But because of the global footprint that Just Eat has, you've had to expand and go outside the walls of your company to use outside, whether it be agencies or even freelance resources. How do you how do you stay connected? How do you maintain connectivity? Is there a broader project management platform that you guys utilize? Is it email or Slack teams? How do you corral everybody and keep everybody on the same page when trying to get a project out the door?
Yeah, what we try to do, at least with the agencies that we work with within studios, so the partners that we have, we try to onboard them onto our processes and tools as soon as possible. It can be a little bit challenging, especially when you're talking about like all the IT processes we have to go through. But um, for the agencies that we're looking to onboard onto Zyflow now, it's really important to have them all working in the same way, because that way nothing gets missed. We've noticed that if we go to email, it just ends up being a super long email thread, and no one knows which feedback was implemented, when it was implemented, who's responsible for taking the next step. It just doesn't create any clear overview. So that's definitely, yeah, one of the reasons we wanted to get Ziflow onboarded as soon as possible.
So when you say having to use email, that almost seems like you're taking a time machine back, 3, 4,
Yeah.
5 years, right? It's almost an old way of doing things, and not only is it difficult to manage and maintain, but you also lose some of the accountability that software can provide, can layer on top of what it is you're doing. You know which agency is working on what and when because they are tagged or flagged within your project management tool or even within Ziflow. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we use Jira, and yeah, that's also one of it's kind of the foundation of everything that we do. Everything gets logged in Jira. So yeah, when we work with an agency, ideally they're on Jira so they can just work alongside of our team, instead of us duplicating all the communication outside of the system that we already have. And that's the most efficient way of working. The reason I say email is because everyone has email. So even though it sounds like we're going back in time, it is the most accessible communication tool that we have. So when we are working on a project that is really fast-paced, or we need to get an agency onboarded really quickly, which does happen, we have to be very agile in what we do, then we definitely resort to email very quickly. But the most ideal situation is obviously to have everyone trained on a tool, have everyone working in the exact same way, and they can just run with us instead of running alongside of us.
I like I like that analogy of that running with you, or almost like being part of the bikes, the peloton, as
Mm,
opposed to they're on a separate track entirely. You're trying to have a parallel process. I think that's really interesting
exactly.
that in your mind, when you unify everybody under the same platform, you're together as opposed to being a little distant, right?
Yeah, because that's where the miscommunications happen. That's where you lose information, where you create room for errors, is when you have to go outside of that fast moving peloton. Um, yeah, yeah, that's definitely how it feels sometimes. We're definitely a busy bunch, that's for sure.
We were talking about the time machine a second ago.
Mm.
I'd like to see if we can close the doors on the DeLorean and fire up the flux capacitor and go back in time before you and your team decided to implement Ziflow. If I could put you through a traumatic experience for a moment and send you back to that time, what were some of the biggest challenges that you were looking to solve before bringing Ziflow in and making that a part of your process?
Yeah, some of the challenges that we faced was one, there wasn't a clear approvals process, so we didn't have uh, clear hierarchy of approvals. That was definitely something that we had to solve before implementing Ziflow. So it's not necessarily that Ziflow solved that, but because we had to think about this, and we were forced to think about it and put it on paper, that was definitely one of the positive outcomes of onboarding. Um, and then second, all of the communication could be in Jira, and typically it would be in Jira. So the stakeholder will always feedback in Jira. But then the internal approvals would go through Slack. And sometimes when you would work with an agency, it would go over email. So as a PM or as an operations person, you would be looking for feedback all over the place. And onboarding into the company, you would have to understand that there's different communication channels for different stakeholders. So that's definitely something that Ziflow did. It put everyone into one place, and with that also created accountability and clarity for anyone in project management to know where things were at. Anyone can look in Ziflow and see what stage something is at, and also send it to the right person. So that's been really helpful. One of the biggest things that drove us to implement Ziflow was the bottlenecks and the waiting time that we had. So if we were going from Slack to Jira and then to email, there's obviously a lot of waiting time in between. And now we have internal approval. Once that's signed off, it goes in that minute, or in that second, it goes to the stakeholder. So there's no waiting times. No one's waiting around for someone to come back from their out of office or from their weekend, or not that people work on the weekend, but we want to make sure that it's in someone's inbox as soon as it's ready to be actioned. And that was definitely something that wasn't happening because it takes manual input. And that's something that has been solved by Ziflow, especially for the BAU projects.
I love that answer more than anything else in the world. But I wanna see if I can separate some things out there.
Mm,
One of the things you said at the top, though,
mhm,
I will say from my experience, when we talk with new customers, they come to us and they say, well, Ziflow it was very easy for us to take Ziflow and implement it into our existing review and approval process because they had one,
yeah.
however nascent it was, and Ziflow was able to, make that better. But what you
Mhm,
sort of just alluded to was prior to having Ziflow, it was sort of up in the air. Who's in charge? Who's approving this? Who needs to see this and when? And I think you may have alluded to the idea that Ziflow was almost like a forcing function to get some structure and some rigor to your process. Did I catch that right? Is that accurate?
yeah, I would say so. The interesting thing is, a lot of the people in our team have been here for a long time. It's definitely a senior team,
Hmm.
and they would know. So if I ask anyone in the team, okay, you have an out of home, who needs to approve this? They would they would be able to tell you the steps. But
Hmm.
someone coming into the new into the team, or anyone having a question about this wouldn't actually have a clear answer. So everyone knew it was almost like part of the organizational knowledge that they have. Um, but yeah, it wasn't documented. So that was definitely a force for us to document it, and actually follow it every single day. Uh, there's no going from the workflow template that we've set already. It needs to be followed step by step.
Got it. So this there was definitely some codification that had happened, going from anecdotal and experiential knowledge and bringing it
Yeah,
into something that was written down. It wasn't carved into stone. It could always change, but at the very least, it was in a place where everybody can look at it and see, okay, this is the process now. Let's move forward from here. And
yeah,
actually helps to eliminate some of the bottlenecks that you talked about as well, where now there's no more sort of sitting up and saying, okay, who gets this next?
yeah.
Which in of itself stops the process and stops the progress. Having something put into place allowed for a lot of more of a streamlined approach because now you sort of know where something is going to go next. There's no vagaries about this, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I've always said about the creative ops function is that we need to put systems in place and processes in place that uh, make it easier for the creative, like frees up the time of the creative and the brain as well, so they can actually focus on being creative.
Mhm.
So we do the work for them and then we get out of their way. And I feel like that's something that's happening here. We've done the work of figuring out, okay, who needs to approve what at what stage and which campaign type. And now all they need to do when they have a new project is do that little bit at the beginning. They know who needs to approve it. And then they don't have to worry about this throughout the creative process. They can just focus on the creative assets themselves and make sure that gets approved. So that's it. Also, it has an additional benefit that they can actually focus on their main job and not on the administrative component of their job, if that makes sense.
No, I actually would argue that that's probably one of those things that, you go through the buying process of Ziflow, you have an intention or an expectation of what it is it's going to help
Mm,
out with. But perhaps one of the knock-on effects that you didn't even necessarily realize is that your creatives are now much more free to be creative because they're not having to deal with the stress of trying to find the right person to see this thing and offer feedback on it. They can just focus on, being as creative as they possibly can. It's almost like an unexpected benefit, a knock-on effect to purchasing a software like ours. Am
yeah.
I talking out of school here, or does that make sense, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess that's why we would onboard any tool to make it to move closer to that. And obviously any tool comes with admin and tasks, but I think it has replaced for those, especially for those smaller projects, it has replaced like the worries of, oh, did I send this? Like, do I need to follow up with this stakeholder? Because the system will do it for them, so they don't have to do all that PM work um, that they, yeah, that they shouldn't have to do.
One feature within Ziflow that actually helps facilitate that doing the PM work for the designer
Hmm.
are our workflow templates. So
Mm,
routing is always one of the things within a review and approval process, and that's really what we've been talking about, is getting the asset to the right person at the right time. Workflow templates give you the ability to have a structured setup depending on the project or the asset or the localization. So, which country will this be displayed in? You can create templates in order to facilitate those repeatable processes. How has your team created templates? Like, what is the structure by which you think about, all right, well, here's one way of doing it, but then we create a second template because there's a different way of doing it? Like, what's that break point for which you think about templatizing your routing process in different ways?
so our system works on a campaign type,
Mhm.
and that gets very granular, but it's basically based on the amount of deliverables or on the type of deliverables. So we've created workflow templates for the smaller campaigns for now. And those have very simple steps. So it's internal approval, stakeholder approval, and then it's basically done. Um, but for larger projects, there's a lot more stakeholders involved. So what we're doing now is we're working with the end-to-end PMs and building those more complex projects workflow templates. The interesting thing about that is we found we can set up a, a basic one, like a standard one, but every project is so bespoke that we probably have to change it for every project. But the nice thing is it's very easy to adjust. And once you have one for one project, when we have multiple rounds of assets, like we might do CRM first and then out of home, we can use the same template. So people don't have to go through the manual process of emailing the same people. You can already have that set up to go at the start of a project because our projects can last months. So that's definitely something that helps us a lot in yeah, in the hopefully in the coming year.
You mentioned the stakeholders who are involved. I'm sure your internal team weighs in on projects at certain times, but then at
Mhm.
some point you have to loop in external stakeholders. Now, those aren't necessarily outside of Just Eat, although they could be, but I presume that you run your creative shop as a unit, and then the approvals need to get outside of the creative shop to others within the organization. How have the others within the organization or even outside the organization found the process having been approved with Ziflow? Do they like it better than getting an email? Do they like it better than getting a Slack message? How is those external stakeholders? How have their needs been met with a software like ours?
I think for them, it's been not too bad of a change because it's quite intuitive.
Mhm.
The only change that we ask from stakeholders, which we make very clear in the training, is that they have to click on make a decision. So they actually have to make a decision to kick off the next stage, which realistically they should be doing in any project. They should be saying, hey, this is the end of my feedback round. But this kind of forces them to do that. So for them, it's been, I think, a very smooth transition. That said, it's been on smaller projects. So on those, it wouldn't get too complicated. I think it's going to be a huge benefit for the larger projects as well because there's so many different conversations happening. And it can also get confusing for stakeholders. So for them to be able to see what other people are commenting in the same round, for everything to be in one place, to be able to compare to other, to like the English reference, for example, if you're reviewing a localized version, or if you're reviewing a Swiss French version to, and you want to compare it to the Belgium one, that's those are really handy tools for them to have that they wouldn't previously have. So I think we'll see those benefits for stakeholders more and more over the next few months.
That's interesting that, first of all, the stakeholder needs to click the blue button. Listen, all we
Yeah.
have to do is click the blue button. Leave as many comments as you want and replies to comments, interact, like use compare mode, compare the English version to whatever version you feel comfortable reading in, but just click the button, please. Like
Yeah.
that's really it's another behavior change, right?
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
stakeholders may have been very comfortable ignoring an email for a very long time because they want to maintain optionality, or maybe they didn't feel like they were involved. Well, now they're involved, and the key part about this is saying this is my decision and that time to move the project along. And even
Yeah.
then, you got to give those stakeholders a little bit of a push along the way, right?
Yeah, and the next thing is like the system can do that for you, so they can send reminders to be like, hey, like that. I can imagine that email gets buried under a lot more emails, but it does help push it along, those reminders. And also a PM will be easily be able to see, okay, where is everything at and why is it stuck with this one person? Is it just a matter of clicking that button, or like you said, is there actually something else? Like, do they want to keep the options open? Or yeah, it's there could be more to it, but then at least you can have that conversation. Whereas before, you might not know why that's happening, why someone's not replying. Now you can be a lot more laser focused on, okay, this project's running along fine, except for this one asset. Why is this one asset not going through? Yeah, definitely.
You're alluding a little bit to Ziflow's dashboard, which sort of
Mm,
offers that top-down view to
yeah.
a project manager. You also made mention of compare mode, the ability to compare an asset to a different asset within a folder or within that project, or even with a different version within that proof. So now I have to ask, like, now that we're scratching the surface on Ziflow, like, what is your favorite Ziflow feature? It could be one of those, could be all the above, but what is the feature that maybe we haven't talked about that has made your life or maybe your team's life easier and has improved the workflow in some way?
Let me think. Well, I was gonna say compare mode because
Mhm.
that's one really handy because we work a lot with localization. Like I said, we are live in so many markets for most campaigns they go live in a lot of different markets. So there's a lot of localizations happening on a lot of different versions. So for a, let's say, localization PM to be able to have an English reference next to the localization to check if the translations have been implemented correctly, that's a huge benefit to them. It makes their life so much easier. It makes things so much faster, so much more efficient. And then also for designers, obviously, they want to check, okay, if a reviewer is checking a design as a designer, they would want to see, okay, how's the French language changing the English design? Are there any glaring mistakes? Um, that's a really, really great one. Um, what I also what I personally really like, I really like setting up automation. So one of the things that um, I think just takes one manual step away from the creative team is the fact that we've set up an automation where when the proof is uploaded, it will automatically change the status in Jira. When the proof goes through internal approval, it will change the status in Jira, etc. So at every step of the way, the stakeholder knows what's happening. The PMs, the operations team, they know what's happening without having to look in Ziflow. So they can stay in their project management tool and they still get an update. And then obviously leaving that comment when the stakeholder can actually review it to again ping them, say you're now accountable for moving this project along. That is I think such a win because again, it takes the creative team off what they're good at, which is being creative, and it means that they have to think about statuses, and now they don't have to do that because it's done for them. As long as they put it into the system, then it's all good.
You know, we work in really an interesting industry. I work with a good friend of mine, Nick. He does demand generation, and everything in his world is trackable via a KPI. You know, he knows the increase or decrease in website visitors and clicks on ads and views of videos. Everything can be measured to within an inch of its life. But in creative operations, a lot of that stuff, it's kind of challenging to be able to say this is our benchmark for project completion. So, with that in mind, um, you know, what type of improvements have you seen in the speed or the quality of your process? Are you able to measure that stuff? Is it a gut feeling, or is it something that you've actually been able to put, you know, time blocks around or be able to track improvements in speed or efficiency? Have you thought about KPIs as it pertains to this kind of stuff within your role as a creative operations person?
Yes, definitely. We've started using or we've started focusing on data a lot more last year. It's always been something that we've done, especially in our project management tool. Because before Jira we had Asana, we also got a lot of data from Asana. But last year was a huge focus point, and more looking at, yeah, how can we be more efficient? Can we cut certain things out? Should we add certain things in? So for the approvals process, I remember about, I want to say a year and a half ago, we did a survey and we asked people how long does it typically take to get internal approval and how long does it typically take you to get stakeholder approval. And I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it wasn't great. So we have that data, and that is a little bit, it's not hard data because we don't actually know, but it's definitely gut feeling from the team who work in these processes every single day. Um, and what we're seeing in Ziflow is that it's decreased by so much. But I think one of the reasons is uh, you get those reminders, stakeholders get those reminders, and they also there's no waiting time in between these stages, which before not only was there a different communication tool, but also you needed someone to send it through to the next person. So that's definitely helped a lot in decreasing those timelines.
I mean, so much of what it is we do in our industry is about feedback, and feedback in and of itself
Mm.
is in and of itself is a feeling. It is, man, this felt to me like it took an entirely too long. It should not have taken this long to get this done. And now with Ziflow, the feeling is, well, this is going much faster than it used to, right? So even though you can't measure it, you can still see, on people's faces or in people's reactions, like this is moving forward with a much greater level of velocity than it did in the past. And sometimes that's all you need, right? You just need good feelings at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah, true. Uh, yeah, and it's also quite logical because you know that previously someone had to actually send something through, and that's just going to take a little bit of time. Like people are working on 5 projects at the same time in the same day, and things have to wait. And now that's not up to the person anymore. It's up to the system that does it for you. So um, it makes sense that that would speed things up a lot. Um, but yeah, we're also seeing it in the data, so that's really positive.
Let's talk about the future. So, looking ahead, are there any
Sure.
features or integrations that you're excited to explore within Ziflow that might even enhance your workflow even further? Earlier you talked about right now you're using workflow templates for smaller projects to route them in the right direction, but there's a world where you can create even more complex ones for bigger, more challenging campaigns. What are some of those other features or integrations that you're starting to explore, and as you start to layer on new stuff, what are some of those things that you're thinking about using here in the future?
One of the biggest challenges that we have is subjective feedback. This
Mhm.
won't be the first time you've heard this probably. Um, and we are definitely looking at, okay, how can we differentiate between subjective and objective feedback? And what that is obviously hard to define, but again, that's maybe a piece of work that we do before we put it in Ziflow. But to be able to say, okay, this is subjective, we can't actually go through with this and have it go through the approvals process after that, that would solve so many issues. I think that's one of our biggest blockers in general. Um, so that's definitely a big one.
Let me finish up by asking you almost like a word association question.
Mm.
I asked this for a lot of customer stories, iFlow stories. It's a pretty simple question, but it always comes out really interesting answers. So, if there is one word you would use to describe your experience with Ziflow, what would it be and why?
I would say, if I needed to describe my experience with Zyflow in one word, agile. I'm finding the not only the process itself, because it is quite agile. That's the word of the year in our company as well, obviously. Um, I'm finding the process of like having a tool that does this for us and automates these things for us quite agile, but also the experience we've had working with the Ziflow team. Whenever I've had feedback or have a question, we have very short lines, and it's either very easily answered, or the product team goes ahead and helps us set something up that actually works for us. So it's very quick feedback that way as well, like a quick feedback loop. So yeah, agile, I would say.
I love that answer. I genuinely love that answer. And actually, it sort of harkens back to, I mean, that's a big word within the Jira ecosystem, agile.
Yes.
It's it's
Yeah,
really something that really it works for not just both pieces of software, but also for the entire mentality of the team. We have to be nimble and fast on our feet and have the opportunity and the ability to change direction if necessary, because the very nature of your industry, food delivery, connecting restaurants with eaters, needs to be fast paced. It can't be slow and methodical.
yeah.
And It seems like with just by using that word, it seems like your process is agile, but it's only going to get faster here in 2025. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. Yeah. It's just speeding up. Every year I'm thinking, oh, it can't get faster or can't get busier, but every year it gets busier. So that's something to say about 2025. Yeah. That's exciting.
Every year it gets
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
Charlotte, I cannot thank you enough. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for telling us your Ziflow story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Eric.
And thank you for watching this episode of Ziflow Stories. For more exciting content about creative operations and collaboration more broadly, head over to our YouTube channel and make sure you click that like and subscribe button so you'll be notified about every new Ziflow story we tell. For Charlotte Lammertink from Just Eat, I'm Eric Manser from Ziflow, and remember, great content connects, inspires, and it transforms. To make it happen, you got to keep your ideas moving, your stakeholders engaged, and your team motivated. So until next time, let your content flow.